Welcome back to our summit, ladies and gentlemen. I'm so happy to have you. I am so happy to introduce you to Dr. John Diamond, and he is our guest today. I've just recently met Dr. Diamond and heard about him a few weeks ago, and we've already become like soulmates here because our writing and our thoughts and our philosophy is very, very similar. And he is a true patriot. He is a true author and writer and philosopher, and he's written several books. His doctor is Dr. John Diamond. He has a master's degree in Christian education. His doctorate is, the doctorate is in Christian education, right? The master's degree was in
Theology.
Theology, yes. And so he's written Fighting the Next American Revolution was his first book. He also has written Appeal to Heaven, A Cry for Divine Justice. Also, he's involved in the Isaiah 3322 project, which is written a book called The Foundations of American Law and Government. So as you can see, he's a prolific writer, philosopher, and understands the fundamental principles of our country at a very, very deep level. So we're very, very happy to have Dr. John Diamond with us today. John, tell us a little bit, if you can, about, you wrote the first book, was the Fighting the Next American Revolution, was about in the early 2000s, right? 2003, 2004. Tell us a little bit about that book and what it's led to.
Well, let me kind of start at the beginning, because you kind of see the sovereign hand of God really kind of going through my life. I graduated in 1983, went into the United States Air Force 6 days after I graduated, spent 8 years in the military. About a year after I got out, I got saved, and then I was immediately went into seminary. So I spent 4 years getting my bachelor's in theology. So I started my life as a theologian, probably more than anything. Well, me and a bunch of people, Alan Keyes and Dave Dobbemeyer, we all went down to Judge Roy Moore's 10 Commandments rally down there when they were taking his 10 Commandments out in 2003.
Oh, I remember that.
Yeah. And I was there. You can watch the old Fox News footage, see me walking down the street with a protest sign standing for Judge Moore. Well, what I decided to do, and I had really no intentions of getting a master's or a doctorate. I just went back and did a 3-year research where I studied everything the founding fathers, I could get a hold of. And I realized as a theologian that they were quoting the Bible just about every time they open their mouth. This is where they got their worldview. I think University of Houston did a study, said 34% of the quotes that come from the founding fathers came directly or indirectly from the Bible. As a theologian, I recognized that every time I read their stuff. So after this 3 years, I sat down and I was like, man, we are on the verge of another American Revolution. We are, at the time, we were probably about 1770.
Right.
Where government just kept getting more powerful and more tyrannical. So I wrote my first book trying to get the church to raise up, especially in patriots, so we wouldn't end up where we are today, because I saw where things were trending. History just repeats itself. Right. So I tried to get the church to wake up. Everybody didn't see. And I wrote in the book, I said this: America is no longer America. America is now an atheistic, communistic police state wrapped in an American flag as a facade. And everybody just poo-pooed that. They were like, oh no, we're free. One of the freest nations in the world. And then all of a sudden, here comes COVID. Right. And everything that was in place to enslave us was already there. People were just too occupied, either too ignorant or too occupied in their own lives to understand how close we were to tyranny. Well, now we're living in it, and I think the people are starting to recognize that.
Finally, I mean, it's a shame that it takes, having to stand 6 feet apart, closing down all of our churches, and making people wear a mask that actually destroys their immune system. All these things, being treated like cattle, basically, like livestock, for people to wake up. It's amazing, but it is working. It is starting to wake people up, don't you think?
Yeah, without a doubt. I don't think it's too late. There's a lot of people that are just kind of throwing in the towel, and I'm not, just because one, I know God, and then two, I know our past. But one of the quotes I have in my book was from a German pastor, and he said it, and I'm going to kind of paraphrase it. He said, when Hitler attacked the unions, I wasn't a union member and I didn't care. When he attacked, this group, I didn't care. When he attacked this group, I didn't care. He said, then he finally attacked the Christian church and there was nobody left to care. Right. So the Christian church, in my opinion, and just like Simone Gold said when she was interviewed there, right, the Christian church is the key to saving this nation. The pastors better wake up. The Christians better wake up. And that's the great thing about it is because there is a biblical solution for this. That's what I talk about in my second book, An Appeal to Heaven. It is a strategy that works absolutely every time. It's demonstratable throughout human history. And if we find ourselves enslaved to our government, just like the Hebrews were, just like the founding fathers were, just like the slaves were during the abolition time, just like Martin Luther King. This strategy works absolutely every time if we just would understand, the wisdom God has given us for this time. That's
right, right, and it really comes down to what Jefferson said when he said, after he was president, he said this at a meeting: the principles on which we engaged, of which the charter of our independence is the record, were sanctioned by the laws of our being, and we but obeyed them in pursuing undeviatingly the course they called for. In other words, they had a deep understanding of the laws of nature and the laws of God, of our existence, of our human existence, and they just followed those principles, and we won. And we're going to win. Again, I agree with you. We should not be pessimistic. Because, and you and I had talked about this, free will. God gave us free will. God didn't give us free will to see us give it up.
Correct.
Right? So.
Right. And what it really comes down to, and this is really the central premise of my Appeal to Heaven book, is the idea of authority. So when you read Romans 13, it says, let every soul submit to the higher authority, for there is no authority but of God. That is just a general template that you can take and you can apply to every institution in the universe. So when I first read that as a veteran, the thing that jumped out to me was a chain of command, just like you have generals and captains, lieutenants and sergeants. When I read Romans 13, I'm like, wait a minute, this is a chain of command. Well, when you understand that theologically, then you understand God himself has created a bunch of institutions, and every one of those institutions has a chain of command. And we're supposed to take Romans 13 and apply it to everything. So God created the angelic beings, right? You had God, the archangels, and the angels. What happened when the archangel Lucifer rebelled? He took a third of the angels with him, right? He was supposed to submit to the higher authority, and he didn't. And the people under him, or the angels under him, were like, hey, we're just following orders. No, the higher authority, God, is who you're rebelling against. So when you understand the institutions that God has created the family, and he's put a divine chain of command, right? God, parents, children. He's created the marriage. God, husband, wife. He's created government. God, government, citizens. He's created the church. God, pastors, elders, congregation. Every institution that is out there has a divine chain of command. We just have to understand what the chain of command is, and we have to know our place in that chain of command and understand that God ultimately is the highest authority in that chain of command. So if the government tells you to do something, who's kind of above us in the chain of command, if they tell you to do something that contradicts the higher authority, which is God, we have the free will, we have the right, and we have the duty to obey God and disobey that unlawful authority. And I'd spoken at church here in Pennsylvania, and I said, you realize that every single story you tell your children up there in Sunday school is a faith-filled believer who told the unjust government authority to go pound salt? That's right. Said that the Hebrew midwives didn't obey the law when they said to kill the babies. Daniel, or Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego didn't obey the law when they disobeyed Nebuchadnezzar. Daniel didn't obey the law when they made it illegal to pray for 30 days. The apostles didn't obey the Sanhedrin when they said quit proclaiming the name of Christ. It's because there's a chain of command. And in every one of those situations, it was the government that was not obeying the higher authority, It was these faith-filled believers who were obeying God despite what their unjust government officials have said.
That's right. That's right. It's always these surrogates. We create these different surrogates, these governments and corporations and all these things in order to do things for us. But then what happens is, just because of the natural kind of inclination of people to abuse the power they have, to, get addicted to power, these things get corrupted. And it's up to us, when these organizations get corrupted, to alter or abolish them, as it says in the Declaration of Independence. And as you said so correctly, it's not just our right to do so, it's our duty to do so.
Right.
And so when these governments, like our government now, is so totally and completely corrupt, it's our duty to start over again and clean it up in any way that we have to.
Yeah, and that's what the Fighting the Next American Revolution book is about, because the Declaration of Independence is very clear. What is Americanism? When you ask people what Americanism is, they really can't define it. And what I do is I go to the Declaration of Independence, because that's our statement of faith. So just like you have a statement of faith for your church, we believe this, we believe this. As Americans, there are very central truths that we believe. There is a creator. He gave us our rights. He created us all equal. It's the purpose of government to protect those rights. And when they fail to protect those rights, it's our right and duty to kick them out and put somebody else in their place. So we have a very peaceful means of doing this. If we just get active in our government, in our politics, we can do this peacefully. If not, it will come to bloodshed. It always does. And if the Christian church does not raise up and lead in a peaceful movement that will turn this country around, people will get fed up. And you already see it now. People are already talking about picking up guns and firearms and everything else. The founding fathers did everything they could to avoid that. And ultimately push came to shove, because the tyrants pushed, not because the people did anything wrong. But I honestly believe we have God on our side, we have history on our side, we have the Constitution on our side, and we've got 200 years of court cases on our side. It isn't until the 1960s, when they made up this separation of church and state, that America basically left Americanism for communism. People think, communism is now just raising its head. I wrote about it in 2003. I'm an Air Force veteran who was trained during the Cold War. Separation of church and state is not found in our Constitution. It's found in the Soviet Union's Constitution of 1936. And it says the church shall be separate from the government, and the government from the church. The separation of church and state was written into our Constitution by judicial fiat. It does not exist. We don't have to obey it. And we need to restore America prior to 1960, when we were one of the most blessed nations that have ever lived in the history of this world.
Oh boy, we sure do. Well, I think it is starting to happen now. That was your first book, Fighting the Next American Revolution. And now the next book is Appeal to Heaven. So tell us about that transition and what the focus of Appeal to Heaven, Cry for Divine Justice is.
Well, when I was praying, years, I basically gave up, because 10 years, I probably spent $20,000 of my own money getting that first book out and self-publishing it and giving copies away, flying everywhere. And after 10 years, I was done. I said, Lord, I'm not doing this anymore. I'm not wasting my time. I'm not wasting my breath. I'm not wasting my money. And the Lord's like, no, this is what I've called you to do. And I'm like, then what do we do? So I was praying 2 Chronicles 7:14. If my people will humble themselves and pray. I was praying that in my living room downstairs from where I'm at right now. And I got to that point where it said pray. And I realized that scripture is not telling us what to pray. It is just telling us to pray. And I just hit a wall. And I'm like, okay, Holy Spirit, the Bible says that we don't even know what to pray. Please tell me what to pray for this country. And the Lord took me to Psalms 2. And what is Psalms 2? It says, the kings of the earth and the rulers have conspired together to say, let us cut his cords asunder. In other words, if you have the higher authority, God, government, and citizens, and the government conspires to create a separation of church and state, let us disconnect ourselves from the highest authority, which is God. And I realized that is exactly what the problem was in America. It's not so much Christians in the Christian church as our government Psalms 2, the judge, the Supreme Court, Congress, all of these institutions have rebelled against God, and now they're using their power to make us either choose to obey God or to obey the government. Well, if you go down further into Psalms 2, not only does it tell you the problem, it gives you the solution. And it says, ask of me, and I will give you the nations as an inheritance. Do we do that? Do we recognize that our government rebelled against God and that God specifically gives us the remedy? Ask of me, and I will give you the nations as our inheritance. So I said, Lord, what's that mean? And he said, appeal to heaven. And I'm like, all right, what does that mean? I thought it was a scripture verse somewhere, and I'm looking in the Bible for it. No, the appeal to heaven, the flag, the appeal to heaven flag, which is on the cover of my book, was the very first flag in American history. George Washington is a battle flag. He flew it over his 6 Navy cruisers. And it's the idea that when your government rebels against God, you can use your free will to obey God, but then you need to appeal above government's head. So when I ask people in a modern context, I said, why do we have Roe v. Wade? And they said, well, the Supreme Court. And I said, why didn't we appeal it? And they look at me like, where are we going to appeal it to? The Supreme Court's the highest court in the land. No, it is not. There's a Supreme Court of heaven. All right, read the book of Daniel. It says the court was seated. All right, this is a courtroom. The heaven is not just a sanctuary or a temple. It is a seat of government. It is a courtroom. Right? So we can appeal about when our government officials no longer obey God and we have no redress of grievances, we still have one place to appeal, and that's above their head. And that's what the founding fathers did. And they wrote that right in the Declaration of Independence. They said, this is what we believe. Here's all our rights. We're created, or we're equal. Our rights are given by God. And then they list 27 crimes. These are crimes, either divine or constitutional crimes, that the government was committing. And then they said, now we're appealing to the supreme judge of the universe for the righteousness of our intentions. This fight is not over. We just need to learn to appeal to a petition, the highest court, and God will intercede. One of the versions of that appeal to heaven flag was actually a cloud with an arm coming out of it holding a sword, saying that God would fight our battles for us. We have lost that. We have to understand we have to draw lines in the sand. God's law and constitutional law. We are not budging. We don't care what the government says. I am not budging off of any of those things. Now, if you want to start a fight, we're going to appeal to heaven. We're going to call God in, just like David did with Saul. May the Lord judge between you and I, right? So that's what we need to do. We need to call in the highest authority, because England was the biggest superpower in the world and probably one of the history of the world. And here you got a nation of farmers with pitchforks that took down the biggest superpower ever, right? David taking down Goliath is really what that was. It was because of God, and our founding fathers say that all the time. Franklin, Washington says all of us has seen supernatural imposition where God intervened in a battle and this and that. That's what we need again in this nation. So we have to understand we're not left to do this just from the bottom up. We can do it from the top down too. We can call in the supreme authority, start grassroots movements like you're doing and I'm doing. And now that government, that illegal government, is pinched in the middle between an almighty God and a faithful people. That's what Hebrews 11 faith looks like.
Well, and I think really that appeal to heaven, God works through us. And so it's us. So it is bottom up, it is top down, and then we pinch them in the middle, we get rid of them, we turn things around and restructure so that we are in tune with God's law, natural law.
Yeah.
And so it's like a cleansing process that we're going through right now. And so I think that in a way that this COVID thing, as bad as it is, it's actually a good thing because it's waking people up. Do you agree with that sentiment at all?
Without a doubt, it's exposing a lot of things because, you know, people got their nose buried in their life and you know, in football games and basketball games. All of this stuff made people, all of that's with all these gods, all of America's gods, our jobs, our sports, our movies, all of these gods were basically taken out of the way. And now, now it made people really focus on things that are very important, probably more, well, definitely much more important than those things. But the thing that we're starting to understand, I think, or at least the people that I'm talking to, is the difference between laws and rights, because we're talking free will. When God gives a law, there is a right attached to it. So if God says, do not worship a false God, first and second commandment, you have the right not to worship a false God. So when Nebuchadnezzar came down and said, worship the first and second, you know, break the first and second commandment, the Hebrew men were like, no, we have a right to obey God. We have a right to disobey you. When God says you shall seek the Lord with all your heart, mind, soul, and strength, when the government passed a law saying that they couldn't pray for 30 days, Daniel understood, no, I have a right to pray, and you do not have any authority to tell me otherwise. So if you don't understand that chain of command, if you don't understand God's law and our rights and where they come from, you know, the Hebrew midwives had a right to tell Pharaoh, we are not killing babies. Right? Our founding fathers, if you were in 1774, before the Declaration of Independence, before the Constitution was ever written, and they said we're endowed by our Creator with certain rights, where did they get this list of rights? This is going to be in the Isaiah 33:22 project. We're going to draw this out for the reader.
Right.
Where do they get this list of rights? They got it from the law, because you have the law and the rights are two sides of the same coin. God didn't have to list a list of rights. There's not a Bill of Rights in the Old Testament. He didn't need to. There's God's law. So in the Declaration, it says, we've been endowed by our Creator with certain inalienable rights, and among them are life. Well, where do you go in the Old Testament to say, okay, I have a right to life in the Old Testament? Well, you have it in the law, because it says thou shalt not kill. So if it says thou shalt not kill, then I have a right to not be killed. I have a right to live, and you don't have any right to kill me. So when you understand laws and rights are just two sides of the same coin, you can always study God's law and say, I have a right not to kill babies. I have a right not to worship statues. I have a right to pray. I have a right, you know, look at our modern thing with COVID. Yeah. Jesus said, do not forsake the gathering of yourselves together. That's a command. Therefore, I have a right to assemble together. And it is protected under the First Amendment of the Constitution.
Right.
They cannot prohibit the freedom of assembly. But the Christian church, not understanding the chain of command, not understanding the higher authority, and probably living in more fear of government they are of God, we're breaking God's law because we're submitting to unjust, illegal.
Yes. And one of the things that the group that I've been working with for the last year on was convincing these pastors not to shut down their churches, to open their churches. And it's been inspiring from some, and there's some that just refuse to shut down their churches. We're working with the pastor out in Yuba City, California, and he refused to shut down his church. And fortunately in that case, he had a sheriff that backed him up and called Governor Newsom and Gruesome Newsom and told him that he was not going to allow the state government to shut down that pastor's church. And we were there a couple of days after he did that in that church. And we walked in there, and here's hundreds of people, kids, everyone gathered, having fun. And this is the rest of California. Everybody's got a mask on, walking, keeping 6 feet apart. And here we were, and it was just so joyous in there. And, you know, kids running around happy, no masks anywhere. It was just a wonderful thing. That pastor was a true hero, but unfortunately, he was one of not very many that refused to shut down their church.
Yeah, and I just talked to a pastor's wife not too long ago, and you know, why is all this stuff happening? Why is God allowing it? Because if God's sovereign, He's allowing it at the very least. If He didn't send it, He's at the very least allowing it. And I said, the American Christian Church just went through a Nebuchadnezzar test. And she's like, what do you mean? And I said, well, what was the Nebuchadnezzar test? I said, he passed a law telling everybody to disobey the first and second commandment. And the Hebrew men were like, absolutely not. I said, we just went through that test and failed. And she said, what do you mean? And I said to her, well, what's the fourth commandment? And she said, well, keep the Sabbath. And I said, no, that's only the first half of it. The second half. The first half says, man shall work 6 days and shall rest on the seventh. Those are commands. Those are not suggestions. Those are commandments. So if God has commanded you to work 6 days, no government official has the authority to override what God has commanded you to do. And if Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego were here, they'd have kept their businesses open. They'd have kept their churches open. And they'd have said, we must obey God rather than man because he's commanded us to work 6 days. The Christian church could have ended this COVID nonsense in the first week if we had God's law at the front of our faces. If we lived our lives according to God's law, and that was the sole measure of all our conduct, none of this stuff would have happened. The masks, the shutdowns, none of it. The church should have been able to do that. Now, I'm not saying that in a condemning fashion, all right? But now it should wake people up to go, you know what? You're right. And I've had pastors and elders try to defend their actions. You can't defend your action. The only thing you can do is say, you know what? We obeyed man rather than God. Lord, we're sorry. We're never going to do that again. And we should just learn from that lesson because there is a much bigger test coming in the world. I mean, if you look at end times theology, Jesus said, he said, I will keep you from those who overcome. I will keep you from the time of testing that will come upon the whole world. This is just a prelim. What's happening right now with this worldwide corona, it is a prelim to something much more major that's coming, especially when you start to talk about the Antichrist and all the other stuff. If you're failing tests now, oh, you will never, ever pass them when the real test comes later on. We should thank God for this, that it's exposed, where we are individually in our faith. When Jesus said,
so you're saying this is a dry run?
This is a dry run for the end times, in my opinion. And
we're not doing too well. We're not doing.
I told my church, if you're wearing a mask, you're going to get a vaccine. If you're getting a vaccine, you're going to take the mark of the beast.
Yeah.
So unless you draw that line in the sand, I haven't worn a mask since this nonsense. That's why I haven't been to work since the 4th of July, because I said I'm not wearing a mask, and they said, why not?
I think the mark of the beast was the spike protein.
And Mike Lindell believes that too. I mean, so
yeah,
I told people.
Have you seen the blood work yet?
Yes.
Oh my God. You can see it right in the blood work of people who've been vaccinated. What's happening to their normal blood cell is a nice clean circle. And they're all this ugly, distorted, spiky thing is what their blood cells have been turned into. And there's no reversing that, I don't think, unless, I don't know. But it doesn't look like there's a way to reverse that. So
no. And theologically, those people are unredeemable then, if that's exactly what that is, because it says anybody who gets it, and to me, it just exposes really the people who don't trust God, who fear man more than they fear God, who fear a virus more than they trust in the protection of God. Jesus said when he gave in Luke 18, 1-8, he said, when the Son of Man comes, will he really find faith on the earth? That's a pretty major statement right there. And from what I look at the American Christian church in America today, there's very little faith that exists in the pastors and the pews and the pulpits in America. They're just running around in fear. They don't trust God's protection. They don't trust in the sovereignty of God. They're afraid of man more than they're afraid of God. Again, I just hope that this just wakes everybody up and makes them take a hard look at their own faith. So when the real test comes, they'll be ready for it.
Were you at that Tulsa event?
I was on Alan Keyes's media team. I was actually down there in the side room interviewing General Flynn and Lynn Wood and all of them, Mike Lindell.
So I watched as much of that as I could because I was busy doing my meetings. And so I couldn't go. I wanted to go, but I thought it was amazing. I mean, I thought my feeling was that week we were like a football team that was on the defense. Mm-hmm. On the defense everywhere. We were being, offense was coming at us from all angles. and we were just trying to fight that. And that week, I felt like we took the offense. What do you think?
I absolutely agree. And this is what I've told people. I said, as a military veteran, you can take a American military base and stick it in the middle of Iraq. And if you never come out of the base, they don't care. The enemy would just ignore you and take over the entire country. You can't have this siege warfare mentality where you're just going to sit on your base and you think that you've taken the country. You haven't. That's why Jesus said, go outside. The churches are supposed to be operating bases to go and push the darkness out of a nation. All right. But we have like Martin Luther King said, he said, if all we do is sit in the four walls of the church, mesmerized by the stained glass, he said, we become nothing more than ineffective social clubs. And that's what a lot of churches are today. They're ineffective social clubs that refuse to go outside the four walls of the church, refuse to get involved in the schools and the government and politics and media and everything else. You have to understand, as a theologian, the default condition is darkness because of the fall. That's the default condition. If you take the light out of anything, darkness is just going to naturally take its place. So when the church was convinced to get out of politics, out of the media, out of the schools and everything else, and hide within the four walls of the church, no wonder the rest of the nation's living in darkness.
Yeah. And, when you have things going on, like the multiple genders being taught, and this is a direct attack on the family unit. Getting back to what we started our conversation on, with the bottom up, with the family unit being, and then the 10 family unit, like they had, the early Hebrews had, the 10 family unit, that was like God's law. That was like, the family unit is the key foundation of our society. And if you ruin that, or you distort that family unit, then it weakens the whole thing. So our enemies know that. So what they're doing is they're trying to destroy the family by confusing the young children about their sexuality. And, taking a very common sense, obvious thing like there's men and there's women, and turning that into something that is very confusing for them. And we have grandchildren now that are going through this, and it's really horrific to watch what's happening. So how do we battle that? What I mean, shouldn't the churches be involved in that battle?
Yeah, and it comes down, again, the foundational teachings. When you understand the doctrine of higher authority, or what I call the universal chain of command, God and whatever authority there is, whether it's in the family, whether it's in government, whether it's in the church, and then you understand that chain of command, and you understand first and foremost that God's law is at the top of that, whether it's in the family, whether it's in the church, whether it's in government, God's law is at the top of that. Then you're never going to be deceived by a higher authority, because your mind is on God's law. So I said, if I would have had a business here in town and they shut all these businesses down, I would have held a press conference saying, no, God's law says right here in the fourth commandment, you shall work 6 days, and I'm going to work 6 days. They have no authority to do so. Take transgenderism. Well, you're going to call this person a female, or you're going to call this person a male. No, because God's law says, do not bear false witness. Do not testify something that is not true. If this guy's born a male, he's going to get called a male. I am not bigoted or hypocritical for calling this guy, he's mentally ill. He's got something wrong up here, right? He needs to be transformed by the renewing of your mind. Transgender dysphoria was a mental illness from the time this nation was founded until like 5 minutes ago. But they take over these institutions and they reassign everything. And homosexuality and transgenderism was called mental illnesses for hundreds of years in this country. And now they're going to redefine it. Oh, no, there's nothing wrong with them. No. We all need to be transformed by the renewing of our mind. If there is anything in our mind that does not line up with God's word, it's our mind that has to change. Don't go and change a person's anatomy, right? Because I know people who were former transgendered who's now got saved and their mind got changed, and now they're where they're supposed to be. I also know people that went through the sex change and then they got saved and their mind got changed. Now what happened? So the solution is not to change the anatomy. The problem is the mind. All right, get their mind, take every thought captive to the obedience of Christ is what it says.
Yeah, well, this is a very, very critical part of our battle right here, because it's the fundamental unit of our society, is the family, and we have to save that. We
Yes.
have to restore that strong family structure in our country, and and really start to get under control. But I'm very glad you told me about that. Transgenders that have gone to that other side and then come back. They need to get their story out.
Absolutely.
Somebody, maybe you or me, or maybe both of us, write a book about that, because and have these stories, or do a summit. Maybe we do a summit on that.
Yes, absolutely.
And we get these people that have gone through it and realize what a mistake they've made, and tell the story, because we need to get that out, because our children are being exposed to the other side, to this distorted view of sexuality that is sick. It's really sick. And they're being pounded with that in these schools. And we got to turn that around. So I think if we did a summit just on that issue, and really get it out there, that would be a very, very worthwhile thing for us to do.
Yeah, and we could definitely do that. I can put us in contact with all the right people and do a summit like that. And the powerful thing about it is, it says in Revelation that we overcome the devil by the word of our testimony. When you bring these people in to give their testimony, that, man, I thought I was a woman, I lived this way, my mind was broken, right? And now I got saved and God transformed my mind, and now they're on the other side of it. The media and the schools are not going to allow the other side, the true testimony be told. That's why you and I have to do that.
That's what I'm saying. I mean, it's the only way it's going to get out there, is if we do it. So let's make a commitment to do that. I'm all in.
Absolutely.
All right. Well, we got just a couple of minutes left. Give me what thought do you want to leave people with? What's the fundamental thing people should be thinking about right now that they can do today to make a difference?
Well, I mean, what we started off in our initial email was free will.
Yeah.
You have free will. You have the right by God to choose good over evil, right over wrong. All right. It started right in the garden. Here's two trees. I'm going to tell you which one to eat, which one not to eat. You got a choice. You have free will. All right. So you're either going to be under the law of life or the law of sin and death, depending on the choice that you make. That was brought out in Hebrew, in the Hebrew walk, right? God gave his law and he said, now choose this day. You either obey my law and you're blessed, or you disobey my law and you're cursed. That applies to every individual. That applies to every government. You have a right to obey God, period. It's self-determination. I don't have to obey anybody, including government, if what they are telling me to do violates the laws of God. But because the church does not even understand the laws of God, you can get 15 pastors up and ask them the 10 commandments. I'd be surprised if you got 3 that could tell it. That's why they were closing churches. That's why they were closing schools, right? We need to get back to God's law, right? You have to make an individual determination yourself. I am going to obey God even unto death. That's where it has to start. Then you have to know what God's law is. And then you have to know the authority structure for the marriage, for the family, for government, for work, for everything. You have to know that chain of command. I deal with that in my Appeal to Heaven book. Then there's nothing that the enemy can do to you, right? Because then they can say, disobey God or we're going to kill you. Hey, what the Hebrew men say? Hey, our God is able to deliver us. And if he doesn't matter. We're not going to disobey God. So unless we have a firm commitment ourselves as individual people, I'm going to obey God even unto death. That's when we take every bit of their power away. And that's what our founding father said. We pledge to each other our lives, our fortunes, and our sacred honor. That's what it's going to take to win this country back. Our lives, our fortune, and our sacred honor.
Absolutely right. And on that note, we've got several people in this summit that are store owners, for example, that refuse to shut down. Store owners that not only refused to enforce the mask mandate, they've made their store, if you walk in with a mask, you have to either take the mask off or get out. no masks allowed in their store. The pastors that we've done summits at where they've opened up their church against the guidelines in California and Oregon and Washington. And, and those people are still open today. The barber shop that we helped open up in Snohomish, Washington, he's still open to this day, even though there's lockdown orders. People don't have to obey those orders. They're edicts. They're not real law. And they're violating constitutional rights. They can't violate your constitutional rights. That's what we've been trying to preach for the last year and a half. And the people that have realized that, they're standing up and they're doing well, and they're flourishing. So people just need to, stop obeying these edicts, which are unconstitutional.
Exactly.
Wow. Well, this has been fantastic, John. Thank you so much. Really appreciate it. It's been a great interview, and we're going to do many, many more together. And thank you, everybody, for coming today and listening to this very inspiring interview with a man that is going to really help turn this country around. And he's doing it, living it every day, 6 days a week, and resting on Sunday. A very prolific writer. All right. Well, thank you so much. And go ahead.
No, I was going to say, hey, God bless you for what you're doing. And I appreciate everybody who's listening to this seminar. Hey, have faith. Ask God to give you Hebrews 11 faith. That's all you have to do. And then there's nobody that can scare you, put fear in your heart. They can't do anything to you. We need Hebrews 11 faith again in this country.
Thank you, John. And thank you all for joining us today. Hey, that was great. That was great.
Awesome. No, that's a great idea about the transgender. And I got a real good friend that speaks at a lot of the conference